Hello, I'm Joe Hilst. This is a documentary about Edward Snowden. I'm sitting in front of the house. Edward Snowden was born and raised in North Carolina. Edward Snowden was born June 21st, 1983 in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. Edward Snowden was named after his grandfather Edward J. Barrett, who was a Rear Admiral in the United States Coast Guard and later became a senior official for the FBI. Edward's father was also an officer for the Coast Guard, and his mother is Chief Deputy at the United States District Court for the District of Maryland. After his parents' divorce, Edward moved with his mother to Maryland. After missing 9 months of school from mononucleosis, he would drop out of high school. Because he was so intelligent, he passed the GED and studied computers at Anne Arundel Community College.
I'm sorry, pardon me. Can I just check this out? D+, oh my God, I passed.
After college, Edward spent 4 months in the Army Reserves and Special Forces training. He did not complete training and was discharged after he broke both his legs in an accident. By 2006, Snowden was working for the CIA. In 2009, he left the CIA after being suspected for trying to break into classified documents. He was soon hired to work for private contractors for the NSA, like Dell and Booz Allen Hamilton. Over time, Snowden compiled a large storage of classified documents. And on May 20th, 2013, he took a flight to Hong Kong where he met journalists from The Guardian and filmmaker Lori Porteous. Snowden gave the journalists the documents, and The Guardian posted them on June 5th. After the publications, the U.S. revoked his passport, but he was allowed to board his flight to Moscow by the Chinese government. Due to having no passport, he could not travel to Latin America as planned. Edward had to stay in the Moscow airport for 39 days before being granted asylum in Russia. I was lucky enough to get an interview with Ed Snowden in Moscow almost a year after the leaks. What did you do in Russia?
All right, so this is a really fair concern. I personally am surprised that I ended up here. The reality is I never intended to end up in Russia. I had a flight booked to Cuba, onwards to Latin America, and I was stopped because the United States government decided to revoke my passport and trap me in Moscow airport. So when people ask, why are you in Russia? I say, please, ask the State Department.
That's a stick burn. I'm going to use that. Why should I care if the government's stalking me if I'm innocent and have nothing to hide?
The definition of a security state is any nation that prioritizes security over all other considerations. I don't believe the United States is or ever should be a security state. If we want to be free, we can't become subject to surveillance. We can't give away our privacy. We can't give away our rights. We have to be an active party. We have to be an active part of our government. And we have to say, there are some things worth dying for. And I think the country is one of them.
Can anyone turn on my phone while it's off? And would anyone care or know that I Googled the Rangers game last night?
I would say yes to all of those. They can absolutely turn them on with the power turned off to the device. That's pretty scary, but the thing about the Rangers game is also scary. You might say, does anybody really care that I'm looking up the score for the Rangers game? Well, a government or a hacker or some other nefarious individual would say yes. They're very interested in that because that tells a lot about you. First off, it tells you probably speak English. It says you're probably an American. You're interested in this sport. They might know what your habits are. Where were you in the world when you checked this score? Do you check it when you travel, or do you check it when you're just at home? They'd be able to tell something called your pattern of life. When are you doing these kind of activities? When do you wake up? When do you go to sleep? What other phones are around you when you wake up and go to sleep? Are you with someone who's not your wife? Are you doing something? Are you someplace you shouldn't be, according to the government, which is arbitrary, you know? Are you engaged in any kind of activities that we disapprove of, even if they aren't technically illegal? And all of these things can raise your level of scrutiny, even if it seems entirely innocent to you, even if you have nothing to hide, even if you're doing nothing wrong. These activities can be misconstrued, misinterpreted, and used to harm you as an individual, even without the government having any intent to do you wrong. The problem is that the capabilities themselves are unregulated, uncontrolled, and dangerous.
Oh, what? That's crazy. What did you take from the NSA?
I didn't want to take information that would basically be taken and thrown out in the press that would cause harm to individuals, that would cause people to die, that would put lives at risk. So a good gauge of what information was provided to the journalists is a representation of what you see in the press. Now, the NSA and the Defense Intelligence Agency and some of these other organizations have claimed that lives are at risk, that all this military information was out there, that you know, I took all this information about missiles and warheads and tanks, but we don't see any of that in the newspaper. You know, we haven't seen any stories on that.
Do you consider yourself a patriot?
I do. You know, I think patriot is a word that's thrown around so much that it can be devalued nowadays. But being a patriot doesn't mean prioritizing service to government above all else. Being a patriot means knowing when to protect your country, knowing when to protect your Constitution, knowing when to protect your countrymen from the violations of and encroachments of adversaries. And those adversaries don't have to be foreign countries. They can be bad policies. They can be officials who, you know, need a little bit more accountability. They can be mistakes of government and simple overreach and things that should never have been tried or that went wrong.
The NSA, or the National Security Agency, is a government agency that was created with the purpose of improving upon the old information-gathering agencies. Signed into existence by Truman in 1952, it was used to monitor important individuals such as MLK, Frank Church, and any other person of suspicion. It did not cause too much controversy until after September 11th, when the Patriot Act was signed, which gave the NSA complete control of all information flowing in and out of the U.S. With this constant surveillance and Snowden's entry into the organization in 2009, he witnessed the mass collection of data and information. After his leaks, the NSA put up the two-man rule, which made two administrators have to be present in order for sensitive information to be accessed. Under the Espionage Act, Snowden had already earned himself 30 years of incarceration. The Espionage Act was created in World War I with the intention of preventing insubordination and minimizing communication with the enemy. But Snowden never shared any information with any enemy, only shared information that didn't give away any mention of military strategy or nuclear weapons with the public. Snowden was then charged with willful communication of classified intelligence information to an unauthorized person, and was forced to flee from the U.S. Many say that Snowden would win if he was put through due process, but a quote from Snowden says differently. He said, "What they don't say is that the crimes that they've charged me with are crimes that don't allow me to make my case. They don't allow me to defend myself in an open court to the public and convince the jury that what I did was to their benefit." Strides have been made to change the Patriot Act, like with Obama's amendment to it, which made the NSA go through Congress in order to access information.
You might be wondering what was so important they leaked. Documents showed that the European Union offices were being bugged in the US and in Europe. The NSA and Brazilian telecom firms snooped on oil and energy firms, foreign visitors to Brazil, and major players in Mexico's drug war. Sure, the NSA are looking over terrorists and dangerous drug dealers, but what about your privacy? The NSA collected and stored almost 200 million text messages per day across the globe. Snowden can be compared to many whistleblowers. In 1971, Daniel Ellsberg leaked the Pentagon Papers to the public. The Pentagon Papers was the name given to a secret Department of Defense study of U.S. political and military involvement in Vietnam from 1945 to 1967. Ellsberg's primary responsibility for the Defense Department was to craft secret plans to escalate the war in Vietnam. Plans he says he personally regarded as wrong-headed and dangerous. Ellsberg was wiretapped by Nixon's plumbers, who would also be the ones to bug the Watergate Hotel. They also broke into his psychiatrist's office, searching for materials to blackmail Ellsberg. Many people both within and outside the government called him a traitor and suspected him of espionage. Many have come to regard Daniel Ellsberg as a hero of uncommon bravery, a man who risked his career and even his personal freedom to help expose the deception of his own government in carrying out the Vietnam War. NASA allowed us to use their time machine, so we're going to go back in time and ask Daniel Ellsberg a couple questions. What was your role in the Pentagon Papers?
I did draft one of the volumes of the Pentagon Papers. There were 43 main volumes, plus some negotiations volumes, all top secret, dealing with the history, this was the title, History of U.S. Decision-Making in Vietnam from 1945 to 1968. The project started in 1968, and like most Americans, the people doing the study in the Pentagon, of which I was one, thought the war was about to end at that point. President Johnson had just said that he would not run again. He was asking for negotiations, and people thought that it was about over. Actually, it had 7 years to go. I was working on a project then, the Pentagon, so-called Pentagon Papers, which was to learn lessons from the Pentagon, from the Vietnam War. And when that study was completed by '69, I was at the Rand Corporation on contract to the Defense Department. I was the only researcher in the country authorized to have the entire study in my possession to do a project on lessons from Vietnam. And as I read those volumes, I thought increasingly, as I saw the war going on, that these were lessons that shouldn't be just mine to learn and shouldn't be just the Pentagon's to learn, that the American public needed to know this information about how they'd been lied to and how they'd been manipulated into that war. So in 1969, I began copying those top secret volumes that were in my safe. I had authorized possession to them, and giving them what I was not authorized to do, giving them to Senator Fulbright, then chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And he expected to hold hearings, but ultimately did not hold hearings on the basis of those documents. And eventually, 2 invasions later, Laos and Cambodia, many American deaths, many Vietnamese deaths later, I gave the documents to the New York Times, and when they were enjoined, for the first time in our history from publishing, I gave copies to the Washington Post and to 17 newspapers in all, for which I was put on trial, facing 115 years in prison.
So you did not go to trial?
About the time that we were due to go to summation and go to the jury, after 5.5 months in court, after nearly 2 years in the court proceedings, a series of revelations came out of the so-called plumbers, revealing that the White House had illegally done operations. The analogy to today is not coincidental, it's almost a replay, that a set of people in the White House had been doing burglaries, had gone into my former psychoanalyst's office and trying to get material to blackmail me into silence. There had been an attempt to incapacitate me or murder me doing a speech in Washington. Phones had been tapped, 17 newsmen had been tapped, and many, including members of the NSC staff. I'd been overheard on those, and the records had been concealed so as to keep them out of my trial. And after 10 days of continuous revelations of this, CIA and so forth, all charges were dismissed against me by the judge on grounds of gross governmental misconduct.
Today, Edward Snowden still lives in Russia. He has become one of the most influential people of our time by exposing the government to the people. There are documentaries and movies being made about him. Edward Snowden attends video conferences at college campuses and has become popular all over social media. Edward Snowden gave up his rights and privacy in order to protect ours.